Well, we're out here on Eufaula Lake. It's last day of May. It's been kind of an unusual spring. The water was cold and then it was hot. I mean, it'd warm up and then it'd cool back off. And then we had a big rise, kind of in the middle of when those fish are trying to get on the bank. So the fish have kind of been on the bank, then they're off, but we're late enough now. It's mostly a post-spawn type situation, and those fish have spawned out, and now they're hungry, they're feeding up. We are doing what would be referred to as vertical trolling, slow trolling, pushing jigs. I've got a locator up here on the front, which is key to this type of fishing. You got to know where you're at as far as depth. So I'm watching my locator and just trying to keep the boat in a constant depth so that my lure's at a constant depth, and just working our way along here. The fish aren't stacked in here real heavy, but they're here. Enough to keep it interesting. This bottom jig head's a 1/4 ounce, this top one's an 1/8 ounce. So you see I got quite a bit of weight on here. The weight is partially necessary for the way we're fishing, to keep the line vertical so it's not trailing back behind you, so it's staying down there at the depth you want. That's the main purpose of the weight. You can see we're using longer rods than people might be accustomed to. This is an 11-foot rod, which is my preference. Some people prefer 9-foot, some up to 12-foot. 10 or 11 is probably the most common. And what we're doing is we're just going along, keeping the boat in a specific depth so that we're fishing, trying to keep our lure at a specific depth, and letting the trolling motor do most of the action of the bait, hence the trolling. And as you can see, we'll catch fish now and again too. You may notice with these longer rods, I'm keeping the rod tilted forward. In other words, I'm fishing toward the rod. I'm not dragging the rod up behind me. There's a couple of reasons for that. Main reason is these longer rods, if you get hung up, you can just swing the rod back and usually pull it right back off of what you got hung up on. The other reason being, it seems to be a whole lot easier to feel a bite when you have the rod in front of you. I don't know why that is, but just, I feel like I get a lot better feel, especially for lighter bites. It's a pretty windy day, and we found a place we found on this, wind's out of the south, we're on the north side of the riprap where we're kind of out of the wind. It's kind of a different situation. A lot of times you want to be on a windy bank for better fishing, and it may very well be better on the windy side of the riprap, but you can't, in big waves, you just can't hardly fish this way. So just try to get on the sheltered side. Usually works out okay. You may notice using some pretty, not only is it a long rod, this rod's pretty heavy duty. I mean, you can tell it's got some backbone to it. These rods that we're using today were designed specifically for this type of fishing. They're, you can easily swing a 2-pound crappie, just pick it up and swing it into the boat. So while they may be overkill in some people's mind, they're the right tool for the job, so to speak. They perform very well for what we're doing here. Another point talking about these bigger lures and heavier jig heads and all. As you can see, that's not a very big fish. And he had no trouble biting that bigger bait. I've caught fish half this size on these same rigs. These are baits that work. They're proven to work well for crappie, and there's really nothing else really like them that I've found as far as that gives a good big profile and comes in the colors that are useful. But some of the colors, particularly in the south end of Eufaula, black and pink, pumpkin chartreuse, which that may be the best all-around color from north end to south end. That's a really good color. I use black and blue a lot, what I call the Bruise Jig. Works well in different watercolors, seems to. This is a pumpkin chartreuse that I've dipped in orange. A lot of times orange is a color that they'll really key on. So I'll dip the black chartreuse and the pumpkin chartreuse to give a little orange on the bait, and sometimes even this pearl chartreuse I'll dip in orange. Sometimes I'll dip the head of it just to put some orange on the bait. A lot of times that'll key a bite, particularly on the north end. I don't vary a whole lot from pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn. Even in the winter I've done well on these baits. You know, I don't, and I'm not saying these are the best, I'm just saying these are what I've been using and doing quite well on. And other guys have other baits that they use and do well on, and those work too. And some guys prefer more action. They'll use a curl tail grub. Here's your kind of traditional sassy shad type bait. Sometimes those can be really good. They give off a lot of vibration in that really dirty water. One thing about these longer rods, that just a little tip, I would say, if you're fishing, say, 8 foot deep and you're catching fish at 6 foot deep, it's critical that you continue to have your lure at the proper depth. If I've got my rod tip at a couple of feet above the water and I catch a fish, I'm gonna check, okay, I've got 11 foot out, so I know that fish was at 9 feet in whatever depth of water. You know, I'm just using that as an example. So when you're fishing these shallower depths, say from a dozen feet in, you know, it's pretty easy to keep a constant depth, but these longer rods, it's just a quick way to keep a quick reference. You know, if you have to break off and retie, it's a real simple matter. You just, okay, I'm going to the butt of the rod as my depth, and you just, you know, say you're up here, and you just run it back down there again, and now you're right back in business just where you were without having to think about it. So, just a tip. A key to proper presentation is you want that hook, you want the jig to hang level and have the action you want if it's tied up tight with a knot, particularly on the upper one. So what you'll do is you'll tie your jigs in a loop fashion. And there's a number of different ways to do it. For my upper one, I use the top jig. I use a knot that I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but if you were tying two pieces of monofilament together, it would typically, I think, be called a blood knot. And I'm going to attempt to show you this. I don't know how well it'll show up, but you have your jig in a loop, thusly, and you want to take one side or the other where you have it, where you're wrapping it through the loop, and go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you'll pull the hook jig head through that. Get a hold of it this way carefully. Cinch it down. Before you pull it tight, you want to put a little lubrication on it. Cinch it up, and you got a nice firm knot that A lot of times you can hang up the bottom jig and break the bottom jig off, and this knot won't break. It's a very stout knot. Now for the bottom knot, where'd my jig head go? Oh, here it is. For the bottom knot, I use a little different one. I don't know what it's called, but it's a good firm knot that the fellow that kind of taught me a lot of what I started with, named Brian Young, he showed me this knot. And it's basically, you just go through the jig head where you have it in a point here. When you determine how far you want your jigs apart, I usually go about 1 foot or so. Wherever you start tying your knot, that's where you'll end up. Doesn't matter whether this loop is this long or this long, you'll still be this far apart when you're done. So wherever you want to finish, that's where you want to start. So I've got up through the eye and I've got a hold of both of them. I'm going to bring it over where I've got a loop, and I'm going to go through the loop with the jig head. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to grasp all this down close to the eye, and that way it makes a good small loop. And then I'm going to pull both ends and pull it down to toward the knot, the eye of the jig. A little lubrication to it again. Pull both ends, and then you got a nice loop. So then I'll take the tag end off. Your dentist would not recommend that, but it works well. And there you have both your jigs on loop. Now when we put a body on here, which in this case we'll put a black and pink because that's what I grabbed. When you put your body on here, there are times when colors are very important. There's also times when they're not so important. A time where a color might not be as important is when the crappie are at the peak of the spawn and they're right on the bank. A lot of times colors aren't near as important then because they're going to be able to see it when they're in water a foot deep. They're going to be able to see whatever you drop in there. So, and it's not to say that one color might not work better than another, but it doesn't seem to be as critical. Now, when you're fishing out in a little bit deeper water, particularly the stained water, color can be very critical to the point where they'll bite one combination and nothing else on a particular day. And I've also had where they'll quit biting a particular combination until you just start trying colors until you find another one that they like, and you know, don't really know what it is. It might be that the sun angle has changed and the light penetration has changed. And you know, it might just be something that they can see better that you're changing to. There's no way of really knowing, but color can be the difference between catching anything and catching a lot. I know that for sure. Okay, you're just gonna go into what would be the head of the plastic. In this case, these baits don't have a very big area, so you gotta be kind of precise with your hook. Just run it down just like a plastic worm or any other jig or tube. And then you come out down at the base and push it on up. Some people will put a drop of super glue or crazy glue on the shaft of their hook and then slide it up there, and it's supposed to hold the plastic in place really well. I usually go through them fast enough, either getting hung up or fish yanking them off, that I don't worry too much about it. But there's your basic rig for what we're doing today. This is by no means the essential rig. This is just how I've learned to do it. Works well. Some guys prefer to use just one jig. I've seen people use 3 jig. Another misconception with crappie, a lot of people think They come up to the bank to spawn, and they're easy to catch. Lots of people are catching a lot of fish. They finish their spawn, they pull back off those banks, and a lot of people don't crappie fish till the next spring. But you know, we're showing today that fish can be caught, and this same technique can work in the middle of July, August, when you know, a lot of people wouldn't even think about crappie fishing, and the fishing can be really, really good. So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't let prejudices keep you from trying new things at new times of year, because it certainly it can be uncomfortable, but it's not near as hot when you're catching big old crappie. You can sure bear it a whole lot easier.